Hey everybody, welcome to episode 62 of the Is That Normal podcast, and today we're talking about podcasts.
Yes. We want to share the love today, and we're going to highlight some other podcasts. And part of that is because, we want to share some of our influences, have a little bit of fun today.
Yeah.
But we also hopefully, want to help parents find some resources as well as use it to connect with their children. So we're going to be highlighting some different areas of podcasts that we've listened to and that we've enjoyed. And, so just this week I had a really cool experience because my daughter, Shiloh, who just turned 18, she's a podcast listener. And she has a lot of times when she's doing chores or things like that. And when I've talked to her about it, she tends to listen to comedy podcasts. That's one of her big genres. And then she also likes to listen to true crime podcasts. So she's into that kind of stuff. So there was a new true crime podcast that just came out last month. And I said, hey, have you heard of this? And she's like, no. And I said, well, let's listen to it together. And so we actually listened to the first episode together. And then we've both been listening to it. And it's created this really fun, something we share.
Yeah.
We're getting to talk about what we're enjoying about it. And so it's created this neat conversation connection piece for me and my daughter. So lots of ways that, podcasts can be an impact in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's literally a podcast for everything.
Yes.
No matter what you're interested in or what you want to know or learn, there is a podcast out there, and it's such a unique thing. It's kind of taken on a life of its own, just like the internet now. It's available, it's there, and doesn't cost anything, and it's just it's another forum to be able to learn or just find content that you can easily access and consume. So it's really a neat forum to be able to just find all kinds of cool stuff.
Yep, absolutely. So, so today we're going to share some podcasts and highlight some things, and hopefully, mostly, we want to do it so we can resource parents to continue to make a deep impact into the lives of their teens and young adults. So, Randell, as we start discussing this, I think one of the first areas to address is influence, because whatever we consume has an influence on us.
Sure.
And I know we would both admit, and we've talked about this in some other episodes, we have been impacted and influenced by a lot of art and culture pieces. And I know we've talked about this. We're both like music trivia nerds, right?
Absolutely.
So we love music. We talk about music. We're those guys who know, the second fiddle player's name, and
right.
And I can tell you who produced most of the '80s, hair band albums, and
we're the guys that as soon as a song comes on, we start telling people things, and their eyes glaze over, and my wife gives me the I don't care face.
Right.
Usually. Although now she's learning crazy trivia stuff too, so I'm proud when she shares a piece of random knowledge.
It is good. We can bring them along. That's
good.
Right. And we were actually talking about that this week because my wife had mentioned that when we were in high school dating, and we'd be driving around and listening to a song, and I'd be like, oh man, listen to that drum line. Do you hear what he's doing? And she's like, stop that. You're ruining the music. I don't want to pick it apart like that. But she's grown to kind of enjoy some of those pieces as well. And another one that's influenced us both a lot is movies.
Yeah.
Again, I'm a guy, I want to know who made it and where it was made, and I love watching the special features on those things.
Yeah.
And it's dramatically impacted my language and the way that I write and produce content, whether I'm writing messages for church or writing content for this or whatever I'm doing. Just understanding movies has helped me in my storytelling, but it's also given me some great lines that I use and pull out on people. So yeah,
that's awesome.
But podcasts are in some ways are the same. They are a piece of media that. And a lot of the podcasts I tend to listen to are a story, not necessarily a fictional story, but they are put together to be a narrative, and that's a real common way that podcasts are put together. And as you listen to a narrative, it influences the way I talk and the way I communicate. I know for me, one of the first podcasts I listened to on a regular basis was This American Life. And I'd actually watched a documentary about it, was interested, started listening to it, and I got hooked because they were telling news, but they were telling news in a way I'd never heard anyone tell news before. It was very like relationally driven, personal driven. It was a story, and there was a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there was a cliffhanger a lot of times. times, and it really, I loved it. It's influenced the way I try to communicate. It's some of the structure that they use has influenced the way we've structured our podcast. So so it's definitely been an impact on me. How about you?
Yeah, one of the cool things about podcasts that I've discovered is that it tends to be more of a long form type discussion.
Yes.
And whereas a lot of like TV shows or programs that are produced within a certain time frame, they have to be very rigid about that, whereas podcasts, really there's no limits to that for the most part. And so I've listened to several where maybe it's even from an interview that I've seen on a program, or someone I've seen on a program that is interesting to me, but then you can go into a podcast and you can find out a whole lot more context and a lot more discussion and things that you wouldn't get in a typical kind of boxed
Right.
time frame. And so the first thing that I really started listening to was, I'm a huge fan of Mike Rowe.
Yeah.
And if you don't know who Mike Rowe is, if you've ever seen the show Dirty Jobs, he's the guy from Dirty Jobs. And he's just a really fascinating guy. He's a huge advocate for the trades and a lot of things like that, and just does a lot of really cool stuff. But he just has a really kind of matter of fact way of communicating things, and he does a really good job of kind of bridging the gap between intellectual and just kind of real life. And so he has a podcast called The Way I Heard It, and it's kind of what I would call like a modern day kind of Paul Harvey, The Rest of the Story, if you're familiar with that, where he will tell this, take this story and he'll tell this whole story, and he's a great storyteller, very fascinating. He'll tell this whole story, and then usually at the end there's some kind of twist to it, or you find out that this is a story that you've heard a million times and you didn't realize it till the very end because it's kind of told from a different angle. And so there's always just kind of that twist at the end of it. And so it was just fascinating. And that was kind of what got me hooked on, podcasts. That was the first one I really started listening to. So it was a lot of fun.
That is really cool. So as we start, talking to our listeners about maybe some podcasts that would be helpful for them with their kids, helpful for their kids, one of the other big areas I listen to a lot is sermon podcasts. Most speakers who are Christians, most churches have their sermons out there in a podcast format. So you can get that. And I guess we should back up and say, what is a podcast? Well, it's an audio delivery. It's like a radio show, but it's on demand. You can get that through Apple Podcasts, through Google Play. They've got Google Podcasts. Spotify has podcasts. So anywhere where you're downloading audio content from your mobile device or from your computer, you get those. And so a lot of churches have those in a podcast format. You can subscribe to them, listen to, get it every week in your inbox and those kind of things. So, and I just think for our parents, our listeners, for their own personal spiritual development, it'd be really good to find one or two pastors that you listen to as a supplement to what you get on your Sunday mornings, Wednesday night Bible studies, those kind of things, just as another voice that's teaching the Bible to you. Now, again, you've got to kind of discern that. A lot of the other piece of this is, like you said, there's a podcast for everything. Yeah. There's so many podcasts, you got to kind of boil it down to the ones that are really helpful. Yeah. But I know for me, some of the ones I listen to a lot, I listen to the Village Church, which is Matt Chandler's church. I listen to them a lot. North Point Community Church, LifeChurch.tv, that's Craig Rochelle's church. Listen to Tim Keller. Fascinating speaker. Really enjoy listening to Tim Keller. I listen to Mark Driscoll. And there's others that I'll hop in, but those are some of the regulars. And I usually don't listen to the same person over and over again. I try to kind of mix that up to get some different voices. But how about you?
Absolutely. Love Craig Rochelle. I listen to, I'll check in on his stuff occasionally. And Matt Chandler, I love to hear him speak. Some of the stuff from North Point occasionally I'll check in on. So, but I tend to, for whatever reason, I just tend to a lot of times go to Craig Rochelle and Life Church and out of Oklahoma City, and they're great. Very,
very good. So another area that I think as we talk to our parents and we want to talk about some podcasts that'd be helpful out there is there are a lot of podcasts that are aimed at parents, particularly of teens and young adults, to just help you in navigating leading your family in faith. We've talked about Fuller Youth Institute out of Fuller Seminary a lot, and they don't have a regular weekly, like just ongoing continuous podcast. A lot of podcasts are just, they're on episode 582 or whatever. They do tend to do more mini series, like 4 or 6 episode packages. So like they have one about growing with parenting. We've talked about growing with in that book and that concept. Well, they've got a whole series of podcasts on that. Another one they have is Faith in an Anxious World, which we've talked about. We actually took our high school group through that curriculum. Well, they've got a parent component in a podcast format that you can go, I think it's 4 or 5 weeks that you can listen to and go along. So that's a good one. Another one that I've really enjoyed recently, it's actually a newer podcast, is called the Smart Family Podcast. Carrie Newhoff, who's a pastor and a speaker and a leadership guy, and I listen to his. He's got a leadership podcast, the Carrie Newhoff Leadership Podcast. But his wife is an attorney, and she, along with their family pediatrician, who's been a pediatrician for like 30 years or something, they start a podcast for parents and families. And man, they address all sorts of cool stuff. I mean, they talk about, how to discipline your children. They talk about screen issues. They seem to come back to that a lot because that's like the prevailing challenge of parenting today, of all ages, and just some really good practical advice from real experts in some of those things. So that's a cool one. And then, of course, the D6 podcast, which we've talked about. We've had Ron Hunter, who a lot of D6 has been his brainchild, but that's from the Randell House Publishing. But this is their arm that just specifically says that we've got to train our families up to follow the Lord. And so they've got all sorts of resources, and one of them is a podcast that's aimed at
and they do a really good job with their podcast.
Oh, they do a great job. Always having relevant voices on there. They do a lot of interviews, and so a really good one to check out.
Yep. And also there's the issue of podcasts that we can recommend to our kids to maybe help them grow and learn. Yeah,
absolutely. And there, again, there's a lot, just a few that I really think are good, well done, and that kids would be willing to listen to. The Bible Project has a podcast which they've published a lot of small group material and Sunday school material over the years, but they dig deep into like understand why the Bible is the way it is and how we understand the context of it, and but it's done in a really compelling way, and they just have a podcast, and so if your kids have lots of questions about like all those really difficult things in the Bible, and you have no way to, you're like, I don't know how to answer that. The Bible Project probably has an episode on that. I mean, and again, done in a way that's really compelling, and I think kids would listen to. And so it's a really good one. And then two, and these are kind of related. These two people run both of these, but it's the Bible Binge and the Popcast. And the Popcast actually came first, and it's not necessarily a Christian podcast, but it's done by Christian people, but they just deal with issues of pop culture and what's going on in our culture today. One of the guys on there, he wrote for the Skit Guys, which they're a Christian media organization, and he's done some other things, but they get on there and they just kind of talk about things that are going on in our world today and how we're supposed to respond to them, and it's really cool, something your kids would enjoy, but also would create good conversation with you and your children. And then they do another one called the Bible Binge, which is they're just going through the Bible and talking about it in a very real, like new, fresh eyes sort of way that I think kids would really connect with. And so all of those I think would be good ones to do together. Kind of again, it'd be like, hey, let's listen to an episode of this together or separately and come back together and talk about it. I think it'd be good to do some of those with your kids. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then the last category are fun podcasts, and we have a few in common. That I know we share. One is one you turned me on to, which was Malcolm Gladwell and revisionist history. And so my podcast time, I listen to podcasts way more in the warmer weather because my podcast time is when I mow.
Oh, right.
And I mow several yards through the summer. So I've discovered, I've got a good set of over-the-ear headphones. And so when I get on the mower, I start listening to podcasts. And so usually, when I mow several yards, I can knock out several. And revisionist history, another kind of one of those maybe a little nerdy podcasts, but I love it. Great. Malcolm Gladwell, great storyteller. Yeah, and
he's going to keep you on the edge of your seat, isn't he? Yeah.
Absolutely, and also just has a very, very unique way of not only telling stories, but sometimes using those to maybe illustrate and get you to think about things in a way that you've never thought of them before, and from a totally different angle. So those are really good. I know I have several, but tell me a few of your favorites.
Yeah. So like I said, I like This American Life, and they've got a thing that kind of does spin-off called Serial, which is one of those true crime things where they take a case and kind of spend a season and talk about it. And my daughter's listened to that one with me as well. I also like Armchair Expert, and it's a tough one. It's like a 2-hour conversation, and it's unscripted, and but it's Dax Shepard, and he has people on there and interview them, and it's rough and it's raw, but boy, a lot of like just things that we all probably as people need to talk about that we don't talk about. He brings those up in this podcast, and so it's an interesting one I listen to. And then I sometimes listen to Ear Biscuits, which is Rhett and Link's podcast, and so they're fun guys. So
there's a few sports ones as well that I listen to. There's also one that I've listened to some that I know has become very popular called the Office Ladies podcast. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay, so for if you're a fan of The Office,
keep going.
The two actresses that played Pam and Angela are like real life like best friends. So it's Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fisher.
Yeah. So
they started a podcast called the Office Ladies Podcast, and from episode 1, they started with the pilot episode, and they every episode of their podcast, they talk about an episode of The Office, and so they tell all kinds of cool behind the scenes stuff and funny things and outtakes, but also a lot of just, kind of nerdy trivia stuff, but a lot of fun stories, and which leads to a lot of other crazy things. And they have some guests on there, and even some of the people, that were actors on the show. And so if you're an Office nerd or an Office fan, it's a cool podcast to listen to, because you learn lots of kind of cool behind the scenes stuff. So I know some people that are huge fans of that as well, and I've definitely checked several of those episodes out, and it's fun to listen to.
That is cool. Well, this has been fun, Randall. I hope that people, especially in those areas of spiritual development, learning how to parent your child as well as connect with your child, maybe you can grab some of those and maybe check one or two of those out. And you brought up a really good point that I think it would be good to talk about. It's just how do you fit all this in, right? And I know you said mowing. It's been a good time for you. I know for me, 2 times that's really good to listen to podcasts when I'm driving somewhere. If I've got a drive that's 20 or 30 minutes or longer, I'll listen to a podcast on those. And then if I'm just doing like menial tasks around the house, helping fold laundry, do dishes, anything where I'm like it's a mindless job, then I'll stick some headphones in and listen to an episode. So it's kind of an interesting thing. You kind of got to carve out a space to do it, but I think it's been really beneficial for me to do that.
And the great thing about podcasts is, for most of us, we're probably consuming them on our mobile device, which is usually with us wherever we're at. So, if you're listening to it in the car and then you hop out and you go to do something else, you can always pick it up later because it's right there and right where you left off. So it's a good way to get that content and kind of have it with you whenever's convenient for you. So today, as we wrap up our 2 takeaways, the first thing is just to find some time to check out a new podcast after you've listened to ours, of course. And hey, we would love, like, on our social media pages, just to comment and tell us what you're listening to, or if you've checked out some of the ones that maybe we've mentioned. Let us know what you think of them. Tell us what you like and what your favorite podcasts are. And then join us in 2 weeks as we tackle episode 63, which is "Should You Die on That Hill?" Which
cue ominous music.
which is gonna be a lot of fun, because and I think really relevant, and we're gonna talk about some things that I think will be really beneficial for parents, and it'll be a fun conversation.
I agree.
All right, with that, be abnormal.